It didn't sound dramatic at first. No shouting, no gasp from the crowd, no security rushing the stage. Just a pause. The kind of pause that makes people lean forward without realizing it. The kind that tightens the room, not because something loud happened, but because something didn't. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And in that pause, something quietly broke. Here's the unsettling part. Most people watching from home never noticed it. The broadcast cameras were focused elsewhere. The applause track smoothed over the moment. The edit moved on. But inside the room, everyone felt it. Because this wasn't just another awards speech. This wasn't another celebrity moment. This was a boundary being drawn. In a space where boundaries are supposed to be invisible. Let me ask you something before we go any further. What happens when a stage built for moral authority collides with a different kind of visibility? And who gets to decide when that collision crosses a line? That question is at the heart of what unfolded at the 2026 MLK Junior Beloved Community Awards. And the reason this moment matters now, right now, is because it exposed something many people sense but rarely say out loud. Not every platform is interchangeable, and not every cause welcomes every presence, no matter how famous. This wasn't about ego. It wasn't about rivalry. And it wasn't about a misunderstanding, despite how quickly that word surfaced afterward. It was about timing, permission, and the unspoken rules of a room that believes it exists above spectacle. What makes this story difficult, uncomfortable, even, is that nothing about it fits neatly into the narratives we're used to. There is no clear villain pacing angrily across a stage. There is no viral outburst to replay in slow motion. There's only a subtle action, a measured response, and a silence that did more damage than any confrontation ever could. And that's exactly why it deserves attention. Because moments like this don't announce themselves as scandals. They announce themselves as discomfort, as hesitation, as something slightly off that people struggle to explain, even to themselves. The MLK Junior Beloved Community Awards are not built for that kind of tension. They're designed to feel steady, grounded, purposeful. They're meant to reassure the audience that moral clarity still exists in a world that feels increasingly chaotic, which is why what happened that night landed so heavily. Inside the venue, the atmosphere was reverent but relaxed. This wasn't a red carpet buzzing with paparazzi energy. It was quieter, more deliberate. Conversations were softer. Laughter, when it happened, stayed controlled. People understood where they were, or at least they thought they did. This ceremony has always carried an unspoken understanding. You don't insert yourself here. You are invited, or you observe. You honor the work, or you listen to it being honored. The stage is not a shared space in the casual sense. It's symbolic ground, and symbolic ground has rules. Most people in attendance knew those rules instinctively. They didn't need to be written down. They were felt, passed along, respected, which is why the shift, when it came, felt almost surreal. Because it didn't begin with noise. It began with movement. From the audience, a figure stood. Not abruptly, not aggressively, just decisively. At first, it registered as nothing. People stand all the time at events like this, adjusting seats, stepping out quietly, moving toward the aisle. No one panicked. No one pointed. But then the movement continued. And suddenly, the room recalibrated. This is the part that's hardest to explain to anyone who wasn't there. Because it wasn't one thing. It was a collective awareness. Heads turned. Not all at once. One by one. A ripple of attention that didn't yet know what it was reacting to. Something was happening that hadn't been planned. And planning matters in rooms like this. Here's where the story gets complicated, and where a lot of online commentary later got it wrong. No one believes the movement was malicious. That's important. This wasn't someone storming a stage in protest or anger. There was no visible hostility. In fact, if anything, the body language suggested confidence, familiarity, as if the stage were an extension of the moment rather than a boundary. And that assumption, that familiarity, may be the most revealing detail of all, because the stage didn't respond the way stages often do when a well-known figure approaches. There was no welcoming gesture, no shift in posture to accommodate, no subtle nod of inclusion. Instead, there was stillness. And then, this is where everything changes. A pause from the speaker already at the podium. Not confusion, not surprise. Control. A pause chosen deliberately. You could feel the room holding its breath, even if many didn't yet understand why. Something about the silence felt instructional, like the pause itself was saying, "This is not part of the program." The words that followed were few, measured, calm, no raised voice, no public shaming, no explanation offered in the moment, just a boundary. And boundaries, when enforced quietly, tend to echo louder than confrontations ever could. This is where people start asking the wrong questions. They ask, why didn't security intervene? They ask, why wasn't it handled backstage? They ask, why make it visible at all? But those questions assume something critical, that the movement toward the stage was perceived as a threat. It wasn't. It was perceived as a misunderstanding of the space. And misunderstandings like that, especially in symbolic settings, are corrected differently. Here's something that rarely gets talked about in celebrity culture. Not all visibility is welcome everywhere. There are rooms where fame doesn't grant access, where contribution matters more than recognition, where presence is earned, not assumed. The MLK, Junior Beloved Community Awards, are one of those rooms. That's why the reaction from the stage didn't come from protocol officers or event staff. It came from moral authority. And that distinction matters. Because when someone like Viola Davis speaks in that space, she is not just a speaker. She is a representative of the values the event claims to uphold: discipline, humility, and earned voice. So when she didn't raise her voice, when she didn't escalate, when she simply indicated that the movement should stop, it reframed the moment entirely. This wasn't personal. It was institutional. And that's why it landed so hard. From the outside, the moment passed quickly. The speech continued. Applause followed. The broadcast moved on. But inside the room, something lingered. People glanced at one another. Conversations paused. You could sense a recalculation happening in real time. Not outrage. Not excitement. Something quieter. Recognition. Recognition that a line had been crossed, however unintentionally, and that the correction had been deliberate, visible, and final. And here's where the story becomes even more unsettling. Because afterward, no official statement immediately followed. No clarification. No apology from organizers. No damage control press release rushed out before morning. Silence. And silence, in moments like this, is rarely accidental. It tells you that the people in charge didn't see this as a mistake that needed smoothing over. They saw it as something that had been handled correctly. That realization didn't hit the public until much later. At first, online narratives rushed in to fill the vacuum. Some framed the moment as awkward. Others called it embarrassing. A few tried to turn it into a feud. But none of those labels quite fit. Because feuds are loud. And this moment wasn't. This was something colder. More precise. A reminder. And that's why, even now, people who were in the room describe the same sensation when they talk about it. Not shock, but clarity. A sense that something essential had been asserted without fanfare. And maybe that's why it still feels unresolved. Because nothing exploded. Nothing collapsed. There was no dramatic fallout to point to and say, that's where it all went wrong. Instead, there was a pause. A step that didn't complete. A sentence that didn't need to be long. And a room that understood exactly what had just happened. So here's the question you should be asking yourself as we go deeper into this story. Was this simply a moment of misread cues? Or was it the inevitable outcome of a cultural tension that's been building for years? Because the truth is, this didn't start that night. It started long before anyone stood up. It started with how platforms have blurred, how causes have become stages, how stages have become brands, and how, somewhere along the way, the idea of invitation quietly eroded. What happened at the 2026 MLK, Junior Beloved Community Awards, wasn't loud enough to trend instantly. But it was significant enough to force a recalibration behind the scenes. And what happened next, what cameras didn't show, what conversations unfolded in hallways, and why certain decisions were made afterward, would change how moments like this are handled going forward. But to understand that, we need to go back. Back to the room before the pause. Back to the unspoken rules everyone thought they understood. Back to the exact moment when standing up became crossing a line. Because what came next didn't just reshape the night. It quietly redefined who gets to step onto certain stages and who doesn't. And that's where this story really begins. Before anything went wrong, everything felt correct. That's the detail people keep returning to when they describe the room. Not electric. Not tense. Correct. as if the night had already decided what it was going to be, and everyone present had agreed, quietly, to follow along. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a place where the rules aren't written anywhere, but breaking them would feel almost sacrilegious? That was this room. The MLK, Junior Beloved Community Awards, don't buzz the way film premieres do. There's no frantic scanning for cameras. No exaggerated laughter echoing off walls. The energy doesn't spike, it settles. It lowers itself. People speak more slowly. Even applause sounds different here. Softer. Measured. Like it knows it's not the point. You could feel that restraint the moment you stepped inside. No one rushed to their seats. People took their time. They greeted one another with nods instead of hugs. Conversations stayed low, almost murmured. This wasn't about being seen. It was about being present. That distinction matters more than it sounds. Because in rooms like this, presence is currency. The audience was a mix, but not a chaotic one. Civil rights leaders, academics, artists whose work had intersected with activism long before it intersected with fame. A handful of public figures whose invitations had been debated carefully, deliberately, sometimes contentiously. That's another thing people don't always realize. Invitations to this event are not automatic. They're discussed, weighed, sometimes rejected, not because of status, but because of alignment. So when people later asked, how could this happen in a room like that? The better question was, how could it not? Because rooms built on moral authority are fragile in a very specific way. They don't fracture under loud pressure. They fracture when assumptions slip through unchecked. The stage itself was modest. No towering LED screens. No sweeping visuals. Just light, wood, and a podium that didn't try to impress anyone. The design was intentional. The focus was supposed to be the words, not the speaker. And that's where the night began to quietly load itself with tension, though no one would have named it that way at the time. Because words matter here, more than anywhere else. Every speaker that evening understood that. You could hear it in the pacing, in the way sentences were allowed to breathe. No one rushed to land applause lines. No one chased reactions. There's a discipline to that kind of restraint. It doesn't come naturally to people used to commanding rooms through volume or charisma. It comes from knowing the room itself carries more authority than you ever will. That authority is invisible, but it's heavy. So when Viola Davis took the stage, the room didn't change. It deepened. She didn't need an introduction that listed accolades. No one recited her resume. That would have felt almost inappropriate. She was there because her voice, measured, deliberate, earned, fit the architecture of the evening. And she spoke the way the room expected her to. Thoughtfully. Without flourish. With pauses that weren't empty. It's important to understand this before anything else happens. Nothing about her presence suggested a moment of disruption was coming. If anything, it felt like the night was settling into its rhythm. That's why the shift, when it began, felt so wrong. At first, it was barely perceptible. A movement from the audience. People stand during speeches all the time. It's not unusual. Someone steps out. Someone adjusts their seat. Someone heads toward the aisle to leave quietly. None of that registers as disruption. Not here. But this movement didn't angle toward the exit. It angled forward. Slowly. Confidently. As if the destination were obvious. This is the moment where recollections start to diverge. Not because people disagree, but because they notice different things first. Some notice the body language. Upright. Purposeful. Not hesitant. Others notice the ripple. Heads turning in sequence. That subtle choreography of attention that only happens when something unexpected is unfolding but hasn't yet declared itself. A few noticed Viola Davis pause mid-thought. Not stop, just pause. A fraction of a second longer than her previous pauses. That's when the room began to tighten. Here's the uncomfortable truth. No one expected confrontation because no one thought confrontation was possible here. This wasn't that kind of space. It wasn't a battleground. It wasn't adversarial. Which is why the movement toward the stage didn't register as a challenge. It registered as confusion. And confusion is dangerous in ceremonial spaces. Because ceremonies depend on predictability, on sequence, on an agreed-upon order of events. When someone steps outside that order, even with good intentions, it destabilizes the whole structure. You could feel that destabilization ripple outward. People in the front rows stiffened first. They had the clearest view. Then came the middle rows. Leaning forward, squinting, trying to understand what they were seeing. Then the back, where whispers started before anyone could stop them. Is this planned? Did I miss something? Is she supposed to be going up there? Those questions weren't spoken out loud, but they were loud all the same. And still, no one moved to intervene. That's another detail that matters. Security didn't rush forward. Event staff didn't step in front of the aisle. No one physically blocked the path. That tells you something important. This wasn't perceived as a threat. It was perceived as an assumption that the stage was open.